linguistics. He became one of the first human officers to serve aboard a joint galactic vessel, the GCS Viridia, a ship owned and operated by the Galactic Council, a coalition of 11 alien species that had made contact with Earth 43 years ago. Those 43 years had been the most complicated in human history. First contact had not been a disaster, which most people had expected. It had not been a war. It had not been invasion or disease or fire from the sky. Instead, it had been a negotiation, long, slow, and deeply humiliating for the human species, though no one on Earth had fully understood that at the time. The Galactic Council had come to Earth with open hands and quiet smiles. They had offered medicine, technology, and inclusion. They had said all the right things in all the right ways. They had called humanity a young species with great potential. They had shaken hands with world leaders and signed agreements and stood beside human diplomats in photographs that were printed on the front pages of every newspaper on the planet. And then, slowly, over 43 years, they had made it very clear what they actually thought of human beings. They thought humans were useful. The way a tool is useful. The way a hammer is useful. You pick it up when you need it. You put it down when you are done. Humans had been allowed to join the Galactic Council as what was officially called a provisional species, a classification that sounded generous but was, in practice, a cage. Provisional species had no voting rights. They had no seat at the main council table. They were assigned roles aboard joint vessels, but those roles were always the lowest: maintenance crews, cargo handlers, medical support staff. Never commanders. Never strategists. Never decision-makers. Marcus Hale was the highest-ranked human being in the entire galactic fleet. And he was a commander, 3 full ranks below the admiralty that made every real decision. He had accepted this the way most humans had accepted it, with a quiet, grinding frustration that they swallowed every morning and called professionalism. But all of that changed on a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday in March when the transmission came through. Marcus was on the bridge of the GCS Viridia, reviewing navigation charts for their next patrol route along the outer rim of the Kepler corridor, when Admiral Siren, a tall, silver-skinned Vale who smelled faintly of copper and rarely looked directly at any human, called him into the private briefing room. The room was cold. The Vale liked cold spaces. Admiral Siren did not sit down. She stood with her 4 arms folded across her chest, 2 sets of eyes fixed on the wall screen behind Marcus rather than on Marcus himself. "Commander Hale," she said, "you are to be informed of a resolution passed this morning by the full Galactic Council." Marcus stood at attention. "Yes, Admiral. Resolution 7 Omega." She paused just briefly. "The Galactic Council has voted to terminate Earth's provisional species status, effective 60 standard days from today." Marcus did not move. He was not sure he was breathing. "Termination of status," he said carefully, "means what exactly, Admiral?" Siren finally looked at him. Her expression was what passed for sympathy among the Vale, a slight tightening around the secondary eyes, a small compression of the lips. "It means Earth and its colonies will be removed from the Galactic Council's protection grid," she said. "Trade agreements will be dissolved. Joint vessel assignments for human personnel will be concluded. Earth will be reclassified as an ungoverned world." "An ungoverned world," Marcus repeated. "Yes. Which means no council protection. No trade. No communication relays through council networks. No legal standing in any council space." "That is correct." Marcus stood very still for a moment. He was thinking about his father. He was thinking about that flashlight and that crumpled star map in that backyard in Ohio. "Why?" he asked. "Just the one word." Siren unfolded one set of arms and touched the wall screen, pulling up a document. The official resolution cites humanity's failure to meet the developmental standards set at the time of provisional admission. Specifically, insufficient technological advancement, continued internal conflict and, she paused again, a perceived incompatibility with council values. Marcus looked at her. "Incompatibility with council values." "Yes. We have been working inside this council for 43 years, he said. His voice was very quiet, very controlled. "We have lost people on council missions. Human lives. We have. Commander." Her voice was not unkind, but it was firm. "The decision has been made." "By whom? The Vale? The Karathi? The—" "Unanimously," she said. "All 11 species voted. The resolution was not contested." Silence. Marcus looked at the document on the screen. He could see the signatures. 11 species. Every one. He breathed in slowly. "When do I need to vacate my post?" he asked. You and all human personnel aboard joint vessels will be transported to Earth within the 60-day window, she said. You will be given full severance documentation and— Thank you, Admiral. He interrupted her very quietly. I think I understand the rest. He turned and walked out of the briefing room. The news hit Earth like a physical thing. Marcus watched it from the communications deck of the Viridia as he began quietly packing the few personal items he kept in his quarters: a photograph of his father, a worn paperback copy of The Old Man and the Sea, and a small compass that had belonged to his grandfather. On every Earth channel, the same stunned silence was breaking open into chaos. World leaders held emergency sessions. Protesters filled the streets of every major city, not sure who to be angry at: the council, their own governments, themselves. Economists ran terrified numbers about what the loss of council trade agreements would mean for global supply chains. Military analysts tried to calculate what no protection grid actually meant for Earth's safety. And ordinary people, billions of them, sat in their homes and felt something that was very old and very human and very hard to name. It was the feeling of being told you were not good enough. It was the feeling of being the child who was not chosen for the team. The applicant whose resume was returned unopened. The person who knocked on a door for 43 years and was finally handed back their key. Marcus's communicator buzzed. It was his friend and colleague, Lieutenant Dr. Elena Vasquez, the senior human medical officer aboard the Viridia. Elena was from San Antonio, Texas. She had a laugh like a thunderstorm and an anger like one too. Her face on the screen was not laughing. Marcus, she said. Tell me this is some kind of mistake. It's not, he said. They voted us out. It wasn't a question. Every single one of them. Every single one. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do we do? Marcus looked at the compass in his hand. He thought about his father's voice, patient and certain, on a cool Ohio night. The universe is a gift, Marcus. You just have to be brave enough to open it yourself. We go home, he said. And then we figure out what comes next. The transport back to Earth took 11 days. Marcus spent most of those 11 days in the ship's small observation deck, watching the stars. Around him, other human personnel moved through the stages of grief in their own ways, some angry, some silent, some quietly weeping in corners they thought no one could see. There were 412 human beings on the transport. 412 people who had given years of their lives to a council that had just discarded them. Among them was Sergeant Ray Delgado, a stocky, dark-eyed man from Chicago who had served 12 years in Council ground forces and who spent the first 3 days of the journey playing cards loudly and badly, losing on purpose so he had an excuse to swear at the cards instead of at the walls. There was Dr. Priya Nair, a physicist from Mumbai who had been part of the Council's Advanced Research Division, and who sat alone at a corner table filling notebooks with equations that no one else on the transport could read. There was Corporal James Jimmy Tate, 22 years old, from a small town in Alabama, who had enlisted in the Joint Forces straight out of high school and had never seen Earth from below since. He cried on the second day and did not try very hard to hide it, and nobody said anything because they all felt the same way. And there was Captain Diana Cole, who had commanded the human contingent on the Viridia's engineering deck for 9 years. Diana was 41, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone who had been refusing to bend for a very long time. She sat across from Marcus in the observation deck on the 4th day and spoke. I've been running numbers, she said. What kind of numbers? Earth numbers. She pulled up a data pad. Population, resources, manufacturing capacity, energy production, military strength, not by Council standards, by our own internal metrics. Marcus looked at the pad. We've been underselling ourselves for 43 years, she said. The Council has had us so focused on meeting their developmental standards that we never really looked at what we actually had. What we'd built. Quietly. On our own. And what have we built? Diana's mouth curved, not quite a smile but something close to one. More than they think, she said. A lot more. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Show me, he said. She showed him. And sitting in that small observation deck, with Earth still 3 days away and the stars burning cold and indifferent outside the glass, something shifted inside Marcus Hale. The grief was still there. The anger was still there. But underneath both of them, something else was rising. Something that felt very much like a plan. Earth was beautiful. Marcus had forgotten this, in 11 years of living aboard Council vessels where everything was engineered for function and the only windows were instruments of navigation rather than appreciation. He had forgotten the specific quality of afternoon light over a cornfield. He had forgotten the way rain smelled different in different cities, metallic in New York, green and heavy in Houston, clean and sharp in Seattle. He had forgotten that Earth was alive in a way no council station or vessel ever was. That it breathed. That it changed. That it was, for all its problems and all its scars, the most beautiful thing human eyes had ever seen. He touched down in Washington, D.C. on a Wednesday morning in early spring. The cherry trees along the mall were blooming. He stood on the tarmac for a full minute after deplaning, just breathing the air, feeling the sun, his sun, Earth's sun, warm on the back of his neck. Then he picked up his bag and went to work. The emergency session of the United Earth Assembly was held 4 days after the last transport returned. Marcus had been asked to testify. He was, after all, the highest-ranked human who had served in the Galactic Fleet, and the Assembly wanted to hear firsthand what the Council's actual reasoning had been. The Assembly chamber was a vast, circular room in Geneva, with representatives from every nation seated in concentric rings around a central speaking platform. Marcus walked to the platform in his dress uniform, Council insignia stripped off, per the Termination protocol, and faced 217 representatives from every corner of the planet. He told them the truth. He told them about 43 years of being handed the mop and told to be grateful for the privilege. He told them about the cold briefing room and Admiral Siren's copper smell and the 11 signatures on Resolution 7 Omega. He told them about the 412 people on the transport, and Jimmy Tate crying on the second day, and Diana Cole's numbers on a data pad. He did not soften any of it. When he finished, the chamber was very quiet. Then Representative Adiz Okonkwo of Nigeria, a woman in her 60s who had been in the assembly for 20 years and who was widely considered the sharpest political mind in the room, leaned forward in her seat. "Commander Hale," she said, "what do you recommend?" Marcus looked at her. "I recommend," he said carefully, "that we stop asking for a seat at their table." Murmuring in the chamber. "And instead," he continued, "that we build our own." The proposal Marcus and Diana Cole put before the Assembly over the following 3 weeks was called, in its official documentation, the Sovereign Earth Initiative. In the corridors of government and in the long late-night meetings that followed, people started calling it by a different name. They called it the Build. The core of the Build was simple, even if its execution was staggeringly complex. Earth, alone, without Council resources or Council trade agreements or Council protection, would construct a unified, sovereign, self-sufficient civilization capable of operating completely independently of the Galactic Council. Not merely surviving outside the Council's umbrella, thriving outside it. The key insight Diana had pulled from her numbers was this. In 43 years of provisional membership, Earth had not been given Council technology so much as it had been given access to Council technology, always through proprietary systems, always with Council-controlled kill switches, always dependent on Council supply chains. But human engineers and scientists working alongside Council systems for decades had done what human beings always did when given even partial access to something. They had learned it, internalized it, adapted it, and quietly, without anyone noticing, begun improving it. Not officially. Not on the record. In basements and university labs and private research stations on 6 continents and 3 off-world colonies that the Council had dismissed as too small to monitor closely. Dr. Priya Nair, who had spent 10 years in the Council's Advanced Research Division, had a data drive containing 12 years of personal notes, observations, extrapolations, and 4 complete theoretical frameworks that went significantly beyond anything the Council had officially shared with humanity. "They gave us glimpses," she told Marcus, sitting in a borrowed conference room in Geneva 3 days after the Assembly testimony. "They thought the glimpses were enough to keep us useful but not enough to make us dangerous. They did not account for how well humans pay attention. Or how good we are at connecting dots they didn't mean to leave," Diana added. Priya smiled for the first time since Marcus had met her. "Yes, exactly that." The decision to approve the build was not unanimous. It was never going to be unanimous. There were voices, loud, reasonable, frightened voices, that argued against it. That said Earth could not afford to cut off what remained of Council trade. That said the risk of provoking the Council into something worse than expulsion was too great. That said 60 days was not enough time, that 10 years was not enough time, that humanity was simply not ready. Marcus heard all of those voices. He respected some of them. But he kept thinking about the feeling he had seen on 412 faces on a transport ship, that old, bone-deep human feeling of being told you were not enough. And he kept thinking about something his father used to say. The worst thing you can do when someone tells you that you can't, is believe them. The vote passed. Not unanimously. Not without tears and arguments and 3 all-night sessions that left the chamber smelling of cold coffee and anxiety. But it passed. 211 to 6. The build was approved. The first thing they did was the one thing the Council would least expect. They went quiet. Earth had 60 days before the formal termination of provisional status, before the Council's communication relays went dark and the protection grid was switched off and humanity was, officially, alone in the galaxy. In those 60 days, while the world's media was focused on the political drama and the economic anxiety and the protests and the speeches, a very different kind of work was happening beneath the surface. Marcus organized it with Diana Cole and Priya Nair and a small, trusted team of 12 others: engineers, scientists, military strategists, economists, and one woman named Sophia Reyes, who was the greatest logistics coordinator Marcus had ever encountered, capable of moving 10,000 moving pieces simultaneously without losing track of a single one. Sophia was from Mexico City, 44 years old, with 3 children and a habit of speaking faster than most people could think. She had never served in the Council forces. She had spent her career managing humanitarian logistics for international relief organizations, moving food, medicine, and equipment across war zones and disaster areas with ruthless efficiency. "I don't know anything about space," she told Marcus at their first meeting. "I don't need you to know about space," he said. "I need you to know about moving things and building things and making sure that what needs to happen actually happens." She looked at him for a long, assessing moment. "Okay," she said. "Show me the list." He showed her the list. She looked at it for exactly 30 seconds. "This is insane," she said. "Yes. I'll need 600 more people and a bigger budget." "I know. And everyone needs to keep their mouths shut." "I know that too." She nodded once, briskly. "Then let's go." In the 60 days before formal separation, the quiet work began. 3 deep Earth facilities that had been operating as geothermal research stations were quietly converted to manufacturing hubs, using equipment that had been assembled in pieces over 3 years under academic research budgets and was now assembled for the first time in its actual intended configuration. 2 of Earth's 3 off-world colonies, Kepler Station and the Mars expansion settlements, were brought into the initiative through a series of encrypted communications that used a protocol Priya had developed specifically for this purpose. A quantum-layered signal that would appear to any Council monitoring system as background cosmic radiation. A network of 7 orbital platforms, officially registered as weather observation stations, were given new equipment loads under cover of routine maintenance schedules. The platforms were positioned at precise intervals along Earth's orbital plane, not for weather observation, for something else entirely. Marcus did not sleep more than 4 hours a night during those 60 days. He lost 8 pounds. He developed a persistent headache behind his left eye that Elena Vasquez, who had returned to Earth and immediately been brought into the initiative as its senior medical coordinator, told him was stress and dehydration and absolutely nothing she could fix as long as he kept working at this pace. "I'll sleep when it's done," he told her. "You'll collapse when it's done," she said. "There's a difference." "Then I'll collapse when it's done," he said and went back to work. On the 59th day, Marcus stood alone on the roof of the Geneva facility. A cold, clear night, the city spread out below him like a circuit board of light, and he looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the stratosphere, beyond the orbital platforms, the Galactic Council was going about its business. 11 species making decisions about the galaxy, drawing their lines, managing their territories, and not thinking about Earth at all. Good, Marcus thought. Keep not thinking about us. His communicator buzzed. It was Diana. "Everything's in position," she said. "All 7 platforms. Both colonies. All 3 facilities. Sophia says we're at 97% readiness." "What's the 3%? "Component delay on Platform 4. She says it'll be done by 0400. Then tell her to sleep until 3 and finish it at 0400. Pause. "She won't sleep." "Neither will I," Marcus said. "Tell her anyway." The next morning, day 60, the Council's communication relays went dark on Earth's end. The protection grid went offline. The trade agreements were officially dissolved. And in Geneva, in a room full of people who had not slept enough and who were, most of them, quietly terrified, the vote was recorded and the documents were signed and the United Earth Assembly formally declared the beginning of the Sovereign Earth Initiative. Marcus stood in the back of the room. He did not sign anything, he was military, not political. His role was different. But he watched and he felt the weight of the moment settle over the room like a physical thing. Representative Okonkwo caught his eye across the crowd. She gave him a single, small nod. He nodded back. The build had begun. The first 6 months were the hardest. This is not a metaphor or a simplification. They were literally, measurably, documentably the hardest 6 months in modern human history, harder in many ways than the Second World War, harder than the pandemic years of the early 21st century, harder than the resource conflicts of 2041. They were hard because they required something that human civilization had never quite managed before. Genuine, sustained, global cooperation. Not the polite cooperation of trade agreements and climate summits. Not the temporary cooperation of disaster response. Real cooperation, the kind where every nation contributed its best resources, its best minds, and its full commitment to a single shared goal, without holding anything back for national advantage. It almost didn't work. Twice in the first 3 months, the whole framework nearly collapsed. Once over a dispute between the European bloc and the Pacific Alliance about manufacturing rights for a new energy component that Priya's team had developed, and once over a security breach that turned out to be an internal leak rather than external espionage, which was somehow worse. It was Sofia Reyes who saved it both times. Not with politics, she had no patience for politics, but with logistics. She had a gift for reframing conflicts in purely practical terms, stripping away the ego and the nationalism and the history and reducing every argument to its simplest form. What do we need, and who has it, and how do we get it to where it needs to go? When the European-Pacific dispute nearly blew up the manufacturing framework, she sat both delegations down in a conference room, spread a physical map across the table. An old paper map because she said it was harder to argue with something you could touch, and pointed to 3 sites in 2 different regions that together had exactly the capacity they needed. You don't have to share rights, she told them. You have to share output. That's different. The European site builds the housing. The Pacific site builds the core. They're useless without each other. So you either cooperate or you both have very expensive paperweights. They cooperated. Marcus spent the first 6 months moving constantly, Geneva to Houston to Nairobi to Beijing to Sydney and back again, visiting facilities, meeting teams, solving problems that only he could solve because he was the only person in the world who had spent 11 years inside the Galactic Council's actual operational structure. He knew things that no one else knew. He knew how Council sensor arrays worked, their frequencies, their blind spots, their update cycles. This was critical, because Earth needed to conduct the build without attracting Council attention. Not because the Council had any legal right to stop them. Earth was, as of day 60, a fully ungoverned world outside the Council's jurisdiction, but because Marcus knew with absolute certainty that if the Council realized what humanity was actually building, they would find a way to interfere. He knew how Council supply chains operated, which meant he knew their vulnerabilities, not to exploit them, but to ensure Earth's own systems were designed differently, without those same failure points. And he knew, perhaps most importantly, how Council species thought about humanity. What they expected. What they dismissed. They expect us to be struggling, he told Diana during one of their regular check-ins, 6 months in. They expect us to be fighting each other over resources, making bad decisions, failing to cooperate. They are waiting for us to prove their assessment right. And instead, Diana said. And instead, Marcus said, we're going to make them doubt every assumption they've ever made. The technological breakthrough that changed everything came from Priya Nair, in the 7th month, in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Johannesburg. She had been working for weeks on a theoretical problem she called the fold, a method of spatial compression that she had first glimpsed in partially declassified Council research documents during her time in the Advanced Division, and which she had been quietly developing in her personal notebooks ever since. The Council used a version of this technology in their fastest vessels. They called it a transit drive. It was proprietary, carefully guarded, and operated on principles they had never shared with humanity. But Priya, over 12 years of observation and careful note-taking and 4 complete theoretical frameworks, had figured it out. Not just figured it out, improved it. The Council's transit drive had a fundamental limitation that was so baked into their engineering philosophy that they had simply never questioned it. It required an enormous amount of energy to initiate, which meant only the Council's largest and most powerful vessels could use it. Smaller ships were limited to conventional faster-than-light travel, still fast but slower and more vulnerable. Priya's version, which she eventually named the Nair compression drive, solved the energy problem through an approach that no Council engineer had apparently considered, using the gravitational differential of the target location as a partial energy source for the transit itself. The destination pulled as much as the origin pushed. The mathematics were elegant in a way that made Priya's colleagues go very quiet when they saw them for the first time. How long? Marcus asked when she showed him the final proof in that Johannesburg warehouse, with rain hammering the corrugated roof overhead. To build a working prototype? She thought for a moment. 3 months, maybe 2.5. 2.5 it is, he said. She did it in 2 months and 3 weeks. The day the prototype drive was tested was a day that not many people knew about, because it was done in secret, aboard a small unmanned vessel launched from the southern tip of New Zealand at 3 in the morning, with only 14 people watching from a ground station that looked, from the outside, like a telecommunications relay facility. Marcus was one of the 14. The vessel, a 40-meter test craft they had built in 6 weeks in a facility in the Chilean Andes, sat on the launch pad for 11 minutes while final checks were run. Then it lifted, climbed, cleared atmosphere, and executed the transit sequence. It disappeared. For exactly 4 seconds there was nothing on any sensor. Then it reappeared, in the orbit of Mars. 340 million kilometers away. For seconds. The room was completely silent. Then Jimmy Tate, who had come back from the transport ship and immediately volunteered for the build, working construction on Platform 3 for 6 months before being brought into the inner circle, made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and said, "Oh my God." Marcus stood at the front of the room looking at the sensor reading. Mars. 4 seconds. He turned around. 14 faces looking at him, exhausted, overwhelmed, stunned. He smiled. It was the first time he had smiled genuinely and completely in 8 months. HFY, he said softly, a phrase he had picked up from a Pakistani engineer on Platform 3, one of the dozens of languages and expressions that had woven themselves into the strange, beautiful new dialect of the build, now from this moment. And everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. Part 4. The Hidden Empire Takes Shape. In the second year, the build became something that its founders had hoped for but not dared to fully believe in. A movement. Not a political movement, not a protest movement, but something older and deeper. The kind of movement that happens when a species decides, collectively and with full understanding of the stakes, that it is done being small. The world had changed. The economic disruption from the loss of council trade agreements had been severe in the first year. Certain technologies had become unavailable, certain medical supplies had required rapid reformulation, certain energy systems had needed replacement. There had been genuine hardship in parts of the world that had been most dependent on council-mediated trade. But human beings had responded to that hardship the way they always responded to hardship. With ingenuity, with stubbornness, and with a creativity born from necessity that often produced solutions better than the problems they were solving. New energy infrastructure, built without council proprietary components, turned out to be more efficient than the hybrid systems they replaced. New medical formulations, developed under pressure in 6 months, proved more effective for human biology than the council-derived pharmaceuticals they had replaced. Because, Priya observed dryly, the council had never particularly bothered to optimize their medical contributions specifically for humans. They gave us medicine designed for a dozen species, she said. Now we have medicine designed for us. The economic models that Earth's economists had predicted, slow contraction, managed decline, a decade of recovery, had not materialized. Instead, there had been 18 months of genuine difficulty followed by a growth curve that made the economists go back and recheck their models 3 times. Marcus's explanation was simple. For 43 years, we were spending energy trying to fit into a system designed for other species. Now we're spending that energy on ourselves. It turns out that's more efficient. The platform network, the 7 orbital stations that had been repositioned during Day 60's preparation, became the backbone of something that the builders began calling the ring. The ring was not a weapon. Not initially, not primarily. It was a sensor and communications array of unprecedented power, capable of monitoring the entire solar system in real time, capable of communicating between Earth and both off-world colonies without any delay, and capable, crucially, of detecting council vessels at a distance great enough to give Earth meaningful warning time. It was also because Sofia Reyes had insisted on it from the beginning and had made it a non-negotiable condition of her continued involvement, a logistics network, capable of coordinating the movement of goods and people between Earth, Kepler Station, and the Mars expansion settlements with an efficiency that the old council-mediated system had never approached. If we're going to be alone, Sophia had said, we need to be able to talk to ourselves. Fast. She was right. Diana Cole oversaw the physical expansion of the ring throughout the second year. 2 additional platforms were added in months 7 and 9, and the original 7 were upgraded with new sensor packages that Priya's team had developed specifically for the purpose. By the end of year 2, the ring had grown to 11 stations, and Earth's monitoring capability extended to a radius of 12 light-years. Which was when they first noticed the anomaly. It was Elena Vasquez who brought it to Marcus's attention, which was fitting because Elena had taken on the role of the initiative's intelligence coordinator alongside her medical duties, largely because she had a paranoid streak that Marcus trusted more than anyone's optimism. "I've been running passive scans of the area within 3 light-years of Earth," she told him on a Tuesday afternoon in the second year, sitting in the hub, the nickname for the initiative's central coordination facility, which had been built in a converted university campus in northern Colorado. "Looking for anything that might be council monitoring activity. And I found something." She pulled up a stellar map on the room's main screen. "This system, here 1.7 light-years from Earth. Technically a red dwarf with 3 rocky bodies. The council catalogued it as uninhabitable and never looked at it again. But 2 of those rocky bodies have been emitting a very faint, very specific type of electromagnetic signature that doesn't match any natural geological process I can identify. And the third one," she zoomed in, "has a crater pattern that doesn't match anything caused by normal impact events." Marcus looked at the screen for a long moment. "You think someone's been there?" he said. "I think someone is there," Elena said. "And I think they're being very, very quiet about it." The decision to investigate was made carefully. Marcus took the decision to the Assembly, a smaller, more secure group than the full chamber, known as the Initiative Council, which had been formed specifically to govern the build. He laid out Elena's findings, Priya's technical assessment of the signatures, and the calculated risk of sending a vessel to investigate. "The council wrote that system off as uninhabitable," he said. "Which means if we send a small vessel using the Nair drive, we can get there and back faster than any conventional drive vessel could follow us, even if someone was watching. Which, given the signatures, I don't think they are." Representative Okonkwo, who had become the Initiative Council's most important political voice, asked the question everyone was thinking. Who would be hiding in a system the Galactic Council dismissed? Marcus looked at her. Someone who didn't want the Galactic Council to know they existed. "Pause. Like us," she said. "Like us," he agreed. The vessel that made the journey was the ES Persistence, the first ship built entirely under the build specifications, crewed by humans, powered by a second-generation Nair drive that was 20% more efficient than the prototype, and named with a deliberateness that everyone involved appreciated. Marcus commanded it himself. The crew was small. Diana Cole as his executive officer, Priya Nair as science lead, Ray Delgado as security chief, and 9 others. A mix of engineers, scientists, and 2 pilots named Chinwei and Amara Diallo who were the best in the human fleet, which admittedly was not yet very large. The transit took 11 seconds. The system was 1.7 light-years away rather than $1.70, so the mathematics were different. 11 seconds of nothing, and then the stars rearranged themselves and the red dwarf was directly ahead, filling a third of the view screen with its dim, angry light. "Sensors," Marcus said. "On it," Priya replied. She was already at her console, hands moving fast. "I'm picking up the signatures. Yes, this matches what the ring detected. Stronger at this range. Definitely artificial. Source. Second body. Rocky, airless surface, approximately 40% Earth gravity. She stopped. "Priya? There's a structure," she said slowly. "Underground. Significant. I'm reading power generation, atmosphere containment, thermal signatures consistent with habitation. Silence on the bridge. How many life signs?" Marcus asked. Priya looked at her console. Then she looked at Marcus. "Thousands," she said. First contact, Earth's second first contact as someone later called it, did not begin with diplomacy. It began with a message. The ES Persistence had been in orbit of the second body for 14 minutes, running passive scans and maintaining calm silence, when a signal came through on a frequency that Priya immediately recognized as a modified version of a council communication protocol, but modified in ways that were subtle, clever, and clearly designed to be undetectable by standard council monitoring systems. The message was in Galactic Standard, the lingua franca of the council. Marcus understood it. He had been fluent for 11 years. "Human vessel. We see you. We are not armed. Please do not be alarmed. We would like very much to talk." Marcus looked at Diana. "They know we're human," she said. "They know what kind of vessel this is," he replied. "Which means they've been watching Earth. For how long? That's what I'm going to ask." He activated the comm. "This is Commander Marcus Hale of the Earth ship Persistence. We are not armed either. We're listening." Pause. 14 seconds. Then a voice came through, and it was not what any of them had expected. It was warm. It was careful. And it was slightly nervous in a way that Marcus recognized because he had felt it himself many times. The nervousness of someone who wants very badly to make a good first impression. "Commander Hale. My name is Caro. I am the speaker for the Haroon people. We have been watching Earth for 6 years and we have been hoping for most of that time that someone would eventually come looking. The Haroon were small, smaller than humans on average, with 4-fingered hands and large, dark eyes adapted for low light, and a skin tone that ranged from deep blue-gray to pale silver depending on their region of origin. They breathed a nitrogen-oxygen mix similar to Earth's standard but slightly richer in nitrogen, which meant that with minor adjustment, they and humans could share atmospheric space without equipment. There were 4,211 of them in the underground facility on the second body of the red dwarf system. They had been there for 11 years. Caro, whose full name was something that translated approximately as Caro of the Southern Mountain House, was their elected speaker. Not quite a president, not quite an ambassador, but something in between. A spokesperson chosen for their ability to communicate across difference. They were, Marcus discovered in the first long hours of communication, extraordinary at this. Caro spoke 6 languages fluently, including Galactic Standard and, remarkably, a halting but functional English that they had learned from monitoring Earth's public broadcasts. We began learning your language 3 years ago, Caro explained during the first face-to-face meeting aboard the Persistence. A meeting that Marcus took extreme care to make feel safe, briefing his crew extensively on body language and non-threatening postures before Caro's shuttle docked. We wanted to be able to speak to you without intermediaries if the moment came. It seemed important. Why English specifically? Marcus asked. Because English is spoken by more humans than any other language, Caro said. And because, a pause, something that Marcus was starting to recognize as the Haroon equivalent of a smile, a subtle widening around the eyes. Your entertainment broadcasts are in English. We have watched many of your films. We particularly enjoyed the ones about dogs. Ray Delgado, sitting 3 seats down, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. We also, Caro continued more seriously, watched your news. We watched everything that happened when the Council voted on Resolution 7 Omega. We watched your assembly sessions. We watched Commander Hale's testimony. You watched all of that, Marcus said. We watched all of that, Caro confirmed. And when we saw the initiative, when we began to understand what you were building, we hoped. The word was careful, deliberate. We have been hoping for 11 years. But in the last 2 years we have hoped more. The Haroon story was one that Marcus had not expected, and which he would later say changed his understanding of the galaxy more than anything else in his life. The Haroon were not a species that had been expelled from the Galactic Council, as humanity had been. They were a species that the Galactic Council did not know existed. Or more precisely, did not know still existed. The Haroon homeworld, a beautiful, temperate planet in a system 12 light-years from Earth, called Haroonvel in their language, had been assessed by an early Council survey 300 years ago. The survey had noted the presence of a pre-technological civilization and logged it in the Standard Developmental Watch database. The Haroon had been flagged for reassessment in 200 years. 200 years later, when the reassessment survey arrived, the surveyors had found a world recovering from a catastrophic geological event, a series of volcanic upheavals that had reshaped the planet's surface and significantly reduced the population. The Haroon in this period had retreated underground and were living in subsurface communities, using minimal energy and keeping a very low profile while they rebuilt. The survey drones, automated, not crewed, had detected no significant technological signatures. The automated report had concluded that the Haroon civilization had collapsed. The Council had filed this report, flagged the system as uninhabitable and moved on. The Haroon had in fact been fine. Diminished, yes. Changed, yes. But not gone. Not even close. We were, perhaps, more careful after that, Caro said, with that subtle widening around the eyes again. We learned that the galaxy notices what shines brightly. We chose to be less bright. For 300 years, Marcus said. For 300 years. We rebuilt. We developed. We became very good at not being noticed. Caro's expression shifted, became more serious. But there are limits to invisibility. Eventually you must decide what you are hiding for. And then the Council expelled us, Marcus said. Yes, Caro said. And we saw that you did not collapse. And we thought, perhaps these are people we can trust. The information the Haroon shared over the following 3 days aboard the Persistence was staggering. 300 years of quiet, careful development in a species that had chosen depth over breadth, that had not expanded across multiple systems or built fleets or developed weapons, but had instead focused everything on understanding, on knowledge, on the kind of fundamental science that the Council species had long ago moved past in their rush toward territorial expansion. The Haroon did not have ships capable of the distances the Council traversed. They did not need them. They had chosen not to expand beyond their home system and the small research stations they maintained in adjacent systems, of which the facility in the Red Dwarf system was the most distant. But what they had developed in those 300 years of patient, careful, invisible work was a depth of understanding of the universe's physical laws that made even Priya ne'er go quiet. The conversation between Priya and Haroon's lead scientist, a tiny, ancient-seeming individual called Ven, who was apparently considered somewhat young by Haroon's standards at 140 years old, lasted for 22 hours without a break, and at the end of it, Priya came to Marcus with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She looked like someone who had been handed a gift they did not know how to hold. "Marcus," she said, "what did you find? You know the theoretical limit on the Nair drive? The energy threshold that makes transits beyond 20 light-years essentially impractical for a vessel of any reasonable size." "Yes." "Ven's work," she stopped, took a breath. "Ven solved it 3 years ago. The mathematics are complete. It's a different approach entirely, not using the destination's gravity as a partial source, but using the local spacetime topology as a—" She stopped again, registering his expression. "I'll explain the technical details later. The short version is, they have a theoretical framework that would allow a vessel of our current maximum size to transit any distance in the observable galaxy with the same energy cost regardless of distance." Marcus looked at her. "Say that again," he said. "Any distance," she said. "Same cost. Distance becomes irrelevant." He was quiet for a long moment. "How long to build a working version? With their theory and our practical engineering experience combined?" She thought. "A year. Maybe less." Marcus sat back in his chair. "Caro," he said quietly to himself. "Then, we need to have a longer conversation." The formal agreement between Earth and the Haroon people was signed aboard the ES Persistence on a Thursday afternoon, with the Red Dwarf's dim light falling through the observation ports and making everything glow a faint, warm red. It was called, at Caro's suggestion, the Compact of Common Purpose. It was not a treaty of alliance in the military sense, though it would become that eventually. It was not a trade agreement, though trade would follow. It was something simpler and more fundamental, a mutual declaration that two peoples, each overlooked and dismissed by the dominant powers of the galaxy, had found each other and chosen to work together. Caro signed with a four-fingered hand, using a stylus that left marks in their own script alongside the English text. Marcus signed with a pen that had belonged to his father, a simple ballpoint from Ohio, worn smooth at the grip. Diana Cole witnessed for Earth. Ven witnessed for the Haroon. Then Caro looked at Marcus and said with careful English, "What do we do now?" "Now," Marcus said, "we show you what we're building." The next 18 months were the most productive in the history of the build, and they were productive specifically because of the combination. Human engineering pragmatism meeting Haroon theoretical depth, each filling in the other's gaps with a complementary precision that felt, to both sides, almost uncannily perfect. Priya and Ven worked together on the drive theory. They communicated initially through Caro's translation assistance and gradually developed a working scientific vocabulary that was half galactic standard and half a hybrid neither side had spoken before. Priya called it the language of the drive, shorthand, notation, a shared grammar for a shared problem. The result, after 11 months of work conducted across two systems via quantum-encrypted transmission, was what they called the Genesis drive, Priya's Nair compression principles married to Ven's spacetime topology framework, producing something neither could have achieved alone. The first test of the Genesis drive was conducted 18 months after the Compact of Common Purpose, aboard a crewed vessel, the ES Determination, commanded by pilot Chinwei with Priya and Ven both aboard, refusing to be left behind. The target, a star system 40 light-years from Earth. The transit time, calculated by Ven's mathematics and Priya's engineering, under 3 minutes. Marcus watched from the hub in Colorado, surrounded by his team, as the Determination powered up on the screen and then vanished. He counted. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 40 light-years. 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Determination reappeared in the target system. Chenwei's voice came over the comm, casual and magnificent. "We're here. Signal is clear. All systems nominal. Requesting confirmation of transit time." 2 minutes 47 seconds, Diana said. Pause. "Outstanding," Chen said. The hub erupted. Marcus stood at the center of it, surrounded by people who were crying and laughing and embracing each other, and he felt the weight of everything. Of 43 years of being told humanity wasn't enough, of 60-day countdowns and empty assembly chambers and cold briefing rooms that smelled of copper, lift off him like a coat that had been too heavy for too long. He thought of his father. The universe is a gift, Marcus. You just have to be brave enough to open it yourself. He looked up at the ceiling, as if he could see through it, through the sky, through the clouds, all the way to 40 light-years away where a human ship was sitting in a foreign system, whole and triumphant and real. HFY, he said quietly. From this moment. Nobody heard him over the noise. That was all right. He wasn't saying it to anyone but himself. The second discovery made possible by the Genesis drive, and by the Haroon's long, quiet attention to the galaxy, came 3 months after the Determination's first transit. Caro had mentioned during one of their regular communications that the Haroon's monitoring network had detected, over the course of several decades, signatures consistent with non-council habitation in 2 other locations in the local galactic neighborhood. Other hidden peoples? Marcus had asked. Perhaps, Caro said. We were not certain. We did not investigate, we did not have the capability, and we did not want to risk drawing attention. We can investigate now, Marcus said. Caro was quiet for a moment. Yes, but carefully. Not every hidden people will be friendly. No, Marcus agreed. But we won't know which they are until we talk to them. This, Caro said with that eye-widening smile, is something I appreciate about your species. You talk to things first. We don't always, Marcus admitted. You more often than most, Caro said. It is not a small thing. The first of the 2 locations turned out to be, after careful investigation by the ES Persistence and a second ship now in service, the ES Resolve, a false positive, a dense asteroid field with unusual mineral compositions that had created the signatures. Interesting for Priya's team, not a hidden civilization. The second location was different. The second location was in a system 7 light-years from the Haroon home system, close enough that Marcus later wondered how the Haroon had managed not to run into them before, and concluded it was simply because both peoples had been so committed to staying hidden that they had essentially been performing the same disappearing act in adjacent rooms without knowing it. The people they found there called themselves the Reth. The Reth were aquatic, or had been, originally. Over thousands of years, through what they described as a long voluntary process of biological and technological adaptation, they had developed a dual form, capable of living in both aquatic and atmospheric environments through a combination of biological adaptation and sophisticated personal atmosphere management technology. They were physically striking, tall and slightly transparent, with a bioluminescent quality to their skin that pulsed very slowly in patterns that turned out to carry emotional information. When a Reth was calm, they pulsed a slow, deep blue. When they were curious, the pulse quickened and shifted toward green. When they were afraid, it went still and pale. The first Reth representative to board the ES Persistence, a tall, currently green pulsing individual whose name translated as something close to still water moving, stepped onto the ship and looked around with enormous, multifaceted eyes, and then turned to Marcus and said, in halting galactic standard, the most extraordinary thing Marcus had heard in the 18 months since the compact. We have been waiting, still water moving said. We did not know for what. But we have been waiting. Do you understand this? Marcus thought of himself at 7 years old, in a backyard in Ohio, looking up at the stars with a flashlight and a crumpled map. Yes, he said. I understand that exactly. By the end of the 3rd year, the thing Marcus had started calling the build had become something large enough that the name felt small. It was no longer just a construction project, though construction continued. New ships, new platforms, new facilities, new infrastructure across Earth, both colonies, the Haroon system, and 2 new stations established in the Reth home system with Reth agreement and Reth engineering contributions. It was an empire. A new kind of empire, one that had no emperor, no hierarchy of species, no ranking of civilizations from most to least worthy. One that had been built on a different principle than the Galactic Council had ever used. The principle that every people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or discarded brought something irreplaceable, and that the sum of those overlooked things was greater than any dominant power had thought to calculate. Marcus resisted the word empire initially. He found it uncomfortable, too much history in it, too much of the wrong kind of history. It was Diana Cole who made him accept it with characteristic bluntness. Call it what it is, she said. An empire is just a large, organized civilization that spans significant territory and has a coherent identity and governing structure. We are that now. The question is what kind of empire we're going to be. I know what kind we're going to be, he said. Then own the word, she said. Don't let it own you. He thought about it for a day. Then he accepted it. The Sovereign Earth Empire. The name was eventually formalized by the Initiative Council, with amendments from Caro and Stillwater moving that incorporated the Haroon and Reth perspectives into the founding language. Officially, it was named in the three languages of its founding peoples. A phrase in English, a phrase in the Haroon spoken tongue, and a phrase in the Reth Lightpulse communication that, when translated, meant approximately the same thing in all three. We are here. We chose this. We will not be moved. The Empire's structure was unlike anything in the known galaxy's political history, which was not a coincidence, because it had been designed specifically to be different. The governing body was called the Assembly of Peoples. Each member species had full representation, not weighted by population or technological level or territorial holdings, but equal. Earth, the Haroon, and the Reth each held the same number of seats. When new peoples joined, and Marcus was already thinking about when, not if, they would hold the same number of seats from the moment of joining. Below the assembly, practical governance was organized not by species but by function: military, science, logistics, diplomacy, health. Each function was led by whoever was best at it, regardless of species. Sophia Reyes ran logistics for the entire empire. Priya Nair and Ven jointly led the science division. Ray Delgado commanded the military ground forces. Stillwater Moving, who turned out to be a diplomat of remarkable skill, led the diplomatic corps alongside a Haroon representative named Dessa. Marcus himself held the title of First Commander, the head of the Empire's military forces, reporting to the Assembly rather than to any single nation or species. His job was defense and, he hoped, the very specific kind of deterrence that came from strength people didn't know you had. Elena Vasquez, who had tried twice to go back to medicine exclusively and had twice been talked out of it by Marcus and by her own inability to stop noticing things, ran intelligence. "I don't like the word intelligence," she had said when he gave her the role. "What word do you prefer?" She thought about it. "Attention," she said. "I run attention." "Your department is called attention." "Yes." He hadn't argued. The Empire's military capability, which grew carefully, steadily, and with great deliberateness during years 3 and 4, was built on a philosophy Marcus had developed during his 11 years watching the Council operate. The Council's military strength was overwhelming in terms of raw numbers and firepower. 11 species, each with their own fleets and ground forces, coordinated under a Council command structure that had been refined over hundreds of years. Humanity had no realistic prospect of matching that in pure numbers, even with Haroon and Reth partnership. But Marcus had watched the Council operate, and he had noticed something. The Council's military was powerful but rigid. It was optimized for known threat profiles, territorial disputes between established species, the occasional emergence of a new hostile power that needed to be contained. It was not designed for surprise. It was not designed to deal with an enemy that moved faster than it expected, hit differently than it expected, or appeared where it had not expected any threat to exist. The Empire's military was being built to be exactly those things. Small, fast, highly trained crews aboard Genesis drive-equipped vessels that could appear anywhere in the galaxy, execute a mission, and be gone before any Council force could respond. Ground forces trained in environments the Council had never needed to consider. Intelligence, Elena's attention division, that monitored the Council with a thoroughness that the Council would have found alarming if they had known about it. And most importantly, the Ring, now expanded to a network of 43 stations spanning the local galactic neighborhood, that gave the Empire a situational awareness picture that no other power in the known galaxy possessed. "We can't outfight them," Marcus told the Assembly of Peoples in one of his regular defense briefings in the 3rd year. "Not yet. Maybe not ever in a straight confrontation. But we don't need to. We need them to understand that any action against us comes at an unacceptable cost. That is deterrence. And deterrence does not require matching their numbers. It requires them not knowing what they're dealing with." Caro, who had been quietly listening, said, "This is how small creatures survive among large ones. Not by becoming large. By being unpredictable." "Exactly," Marcus said. "We are good at unpredictable, still water moving pulsed in a warm green." The moment the Empire stopped being secret came at the end of year 4. Not by choice. A Council patrol vessel, a mid-sized Karathi scout, running its regular route along the outer markers of what the Council still classified as human space, entered the Sol system on what should have been a routine flyby and found something it had not been equipped to find. The Ring. The patrol vessel's sensors picked up Platform 7, the nearest station to the standard approach corridor, and registered it as anomalous. The crew, following protocol, moved closer to investigate. They found not just Platform 7. They found the active energy signatures of 11 other Ring stations in system. They found the ES Resolve on a training exercise in the asteroid belt. They found the deep space communication arrays that connected Earth to both colonies and, through a careful relay system, to the Haroon and Reth systems. They transmitted a query, standard council protocol for unexpected technological signatures in a monitored system. Elena's team flagged the transmission 17 seconds after it was sent. Marcus was on the comm to Diana before the minute was up. "Options," he said. "We let them finish their scan and file their report," Diana said. "The council gets a picture of what we've built in the Sol system. They don't know about the Haroon or the Reth, and they don't know about the Genesis drive's full capabilities. But they know something's here. Or we intercept the vessel before they can transmit. But that's an act of war and I'm not recommending it." "No," Marcus said immediately. "Neither am I." "Then they transmit and we wait for what happens next." Marcus thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Let them transmit," he said. "And get me a secure line to Caro and Stillwater moving. They need to know this is starting." Part 8. The Council takes notice. The Council's response to the Karathi Scouts' report took 11 days. 11 days of silence, during which Marcus's team ran continuous analysis of every Council communication frequency Elena's network could monitor, trying to understand what was happening behind closed doors at the Council chamber. What they pieced together over those 11 days was this. The initial report had caused something between surprise and denial. Several Council species had dismissed the patrol report as sensor malfunction or exaggeration. The Karathi, whose vessel it was, had been more insistent. Their captain was a meticulous officer who had triple-checked every reading before transmitting. The debate within the Council had been prolonged and, by Elena's assessment, unusually heated for a body that prided itself on measured deliberation. The result was an official delegation. Not a military force. A delegation, 3 vessels, diplomatic configuration, carrying a Council ambassador alongside senior representatives from 4 of the 11 species. They broadcast their approach on standard Council frequencies and formally requested communication with Earth's governing authority. Marcus was at the hub when the request came in. He sat at his desk for a full 5 minutes before responding. Then he opened a channel and said calmly and clearly, "Council delegation, this is First Commander Marcus Hale of the Sovereign Earth Empire. Your request for communication is acknowledged. Please be advised that you are entering sovereign imperial space. We welcome diplomatic contact. Please maintain your current approach vector and await escort instructions." He released the channel. The room around him was very quiet. Then Sophia from across the room said, "Imperial space. That felt good to say, didn't it?" "Very," Marcus said. The delegation was met, visually and dramatically, by an escort of 3 Empire vessels that materialized out of transit approximately 20,000 kilometers ahead of the Council ships, having made the journey from their staging point at the far side of Jupiter in under 4 seconds. Marcus had chosen this moment carefully. He wanted the Council delegation to understand, immediately and viscerally, that the vessels they were dealing with were not operating on any technology the Council had provided or expected to see. The escort vessels, the ES Persistence, the ES Resolve, and the newest ship in the fleet, the ES Reth Star, which had been designed with joint Reth and human engineering, took position around the delegation in a precise, professional formation that any military mind would recognize as simultaneously welcoming and capable. The delegation's senior representative was a Vale, not Admiral Siren, but a Council ambassador named Vorith, who was, Elena's research indicated, considered one of the most experienced diplomats in the Council's service. Vorith transmitted on a private channel, "Commander Hale. You appear to have been busy." "We have," Marcus replied. "The Council was not aware of the extent of your activities." "We know." Pause. "The vessel designs you have deployed are not consistent with any human technology known to the Council." "No," Marcus said. "They're not." Another pause. "There appear to be beings aboard your vessels who are not human." "Correct." "Who are they?" "Members of the Sovereign Earth Empire," Marcus said. "The same as us." The meeting was held on the ES Persistence, Marcus's choice. He would not go to them. They would come to him. Ambassador Vorith arrived with 4 aides and the quiet, contained composure of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms with people they found surprising. Marcus respected this. He had developed the same quality 11 years of his own. The meeting room aboard the Persistence had been prepared carefully. Caro was present in Haroon form, composed and watchful. Stillwater Moving had chosen to attend via holographic link. The Reth were not ready for a meeting with the Council, and the decision to include them had been Stillwater Moving's own, a slow, steady blue pulse. Vorith entered, took in the scene, The human, the Haroon, the Reth's holographic form, and was still for exactly 3 seconds. Then, with an ease that Marcus actually admired, Vorith composed themselves and sat. "Commander Hale," Vorith said in Galactic Standard. "I have been asked by the Galactic Council to understand what we are looking at." "I'll tell you exactly what you're looking at," Marcus said. "You're looking at 3 peoples who were either expelled or overlooked by the Galactic Council. You're looking at what they built when they worked together. And you're looking at the beginning of something that is going to change the galaxy." Vorith looked at him steadily. "The Council is concerned." "I imagine it is," Marcus said. "The Council expelled humanity without understanding what humanity was capable of. The Council surveyed the Haroon and reported them extinct without looking carefully enough. The Council never found the Reth at all." Each statement landed. Vorith's expression remained composed, but the slight movements around the eyes, Marcus was fluent in veil micro-expression after 11 years, showed him what he needed to see. They hadn't known about the Haroon. They absolutely hadn't known about the Reth. "What does the Sovereign Earth Empire want?" Vorith asked. Marcus looked at Caro. Caro gave a small nod. He looked at Still Water Moving's hologram. The pulse was a steady, questioning green. He looked back at Vorith. "We want," he said, "what we have always wanted. What you denied us. What you denied everyone in this room. Which is to be here," Marcus said simply. "To exist in this galaxy on our own terms, without requiring your permission or your protection or your approval. To govern ourselves. To grow at our own pace. To build what we want to build and become what we want to become." Vorith was quiet for a moment. "And if the Council perceives that as a threat?" Vorith asked. Marcus met the Veil's eyes directly, both sets. "Then the Council would be making a decision," Marcus said, "based on the same failure of understanding that led to Resolution 7 Omega. And I would hope," he paused very deliberately, "that 4 years of watching us build this would suggest to the Council that making decisions about us based on misunderstanding is not a strategy that has served them well." Vorith returned to the Council vessels after 6 hours. Marcus watched them go, then went to his cabin and sat on the edge of his bunk and put his face in his hands and breathed. Elena appeared in the doorway after about 30 seconds. "You held it together perfectly," she said. "I know," he said into his hands. "I'm falling apart now. I can see that." She came and sat beside him. "For the record, the Haroon's translation of what you said about existing on our own terms got Caro so emotional that they had to step out for 5 minutes." Marcus lifted his face from his hands. "Really?" Dessa said. Caro cried. "Which I'm told is a very significant thing for the Haroon. They don't cry easily." Marcus sat with that for a moment. "Good," he said. "And Still Water Moving's pulse went deep violet when you said we want to be here," Elena continued. "Deep violet is, Reth researchers have been working on the color language. Deep violet is apparently what they call," she checked her notes, "the feeling of being claimed by something. Like when you find where you belong." The Council's response to the first meeting with Ambassador Vorith came 30 days later. It came in the form of Resolution 12 Alpha, a formal declaration that the Galactic Council did not recognize the sovereignty of the Sovereign Earth Empire, that the signatories to the Compact of Common Purpose were classified as unregistered civilizations operating in violation of Council exploration and expansion protocols, and that the Council reserved the right to take corrective action to address what it termed unauthorized development activities in the galactic neighborhood. Elena brought Marcus the resolution at 6 in the morning with coffee, because she had learned over 4 years of working with him that any serious news should be delivered with coffee. He read it twice. "Corrective action," he said. "Yes." "Meaning what?" "Meaning they're threatening us without calling it a threat," Elena said. "Which is a thing they do. They used the same language with the Polhari in 2189 before they blockaded the Polhari system for 6 years, Marcus said. "Yes." He looked at the resolution for a long moment. "They don't know what they're dealing with," he said quietly. "Not with anger, with something more complicated. They genuinely don't. They looked at the ring, they looked at our ships, and they still don't understand. Because they can't imagine it. A species they expelled building something like this, it doesn't fit any model they have." "So what do we do?" Elena asked. Marcus thought of Caro saying, "We have been waiting. We did not know for what." He thought of Still Water Moving stepping onto the Persistence and saying, "We have been waiting. Do you understand this?" He thought of 412 people on a transport ship, grieving something they couldn't fully name. "We show them," he said. The showing was not a military action. This was important. Marcus had thought about this from the beginning, Had thought about it during those late nights in the first year when the build was just a plan on a table and everything seemed impossible. He had thought about what kind of empire he wanted to build, and he had concluded that an empire founded on the principle of recognition, of seeing people who had been unseen, could not announce itself with violence. It could announce itself with truth. The transmission was prepared over 2 weeks, with contributions from Marcus, Caro, Stillwater Moving, Representative Okonkwo, Dessa, and a dozen others. It was sent simultaneously on every council communication frequency, in Galactic Standard, with translation overlays in all 11 council species languages. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a threat. It was not even, technically, a diplomatic communique. It was a statement of existence. It said, "We are the sovereign Earth Empire. We are 3 peoples who were told, in different ways by different means, that we did not fully exist in this galaxy. We have spent years proving that assessment wrong. We offer no aggression. We offer no ultimatum. We offer only this truth. We exist, we have built, we will not be moved. If the Galactic Council wishes to stand in opposition to our existence, we are prepared to defend it. If the Galactic Council wishes to acknowledge it, we are prepared to discuss what that acknowledgement might mean. We await your choice." The transmission was broadcast on a loop for 72 hours. Then they waited. The Council's internal debate during those 72 hours was, by Elena's monitoring assessment, the most fractious in the body's recorded history. 3 of the 11 species, the Vale, the Karathi, and a species called the Sarati, pushed for immediate military action, a show of force sufficient to compel the Empire's dissolution. They argued that the Empire represented a fundamental challenge to the Council's authority and that allowing it to stand would encourage other unregistered civilizations to emerge. 4 species advocated for negotiation, recognizing that the technology they had observed, particularly the transit capabilities, indicated a military confrontation with uncertain outcomes. 2 species abstained from any position, citing insufficient information. And 2 species, the Quell and the Marith, voted in favor of formal recognition. The Quell and the Marith were the 2 smallest species in the Council. The least powerful. The ones who held the fewest votes, commanded the smallest fleets and occupied the least prestigious seats at the table. They were also, Marcus learned through Elena's careful monitoring, the 2 species who had voted against Resolution 7 Omega 4 years ago. The 2 dissenting voices that he had not known about until now. He sat with this information for a long time. Then he called Elena. "Can we establish a private channel with the Quell and Marith ambassadors?" "Technically outside normal diplomatic protocol," she said. "I know." Pause. "Yes," she said. "I can do it." The conversations with Ambassador Thal of the Quell and Ambassador Eris of the Marith were among the most important Marcus had in 4 years. Both of them, speaking carefully within the limits of their council duties, made clear that they had been opposed to Resolution 7 Omega from the beginning, that they had argued against it, that they had been overruled, and that they had watched what humanity had built since with something that both of them, using slightly different words, described as vindication. "We told them," Thal said bluntly in a private channel that Elena had encrypted to a degree that made her quietly proud. "We said, do not mistake quietness for weakness." They did not listen. "Why did you vote against it?" Marcus asked. Thal was quiet for a moment. "Because we are small," Thal said. "And small species understand something that large ones forget. That what you see is not all that exists." Eris, in a separate conversation, said something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "When the Quell and the Marith were first admitted to the Council," Eris said, "we were told that we were provisional species. That we had not yet met developmental standards. That we had potential but," Eris paused. "We were made to feel small. For 40 years. We made ourselves fit into the spaces we were given. And then one day we looked around and realized that fitting into small spaces had made us small. And now," Marcus said. "Now," Eris said, "watching what you have done, I am wondering if we have been making a mistake. If there is a different way." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, gently but with complete honesty, "If you ever want to find out, Ambassador, the door is open." The military crisis came in the 5th year, in a way Marcus had prepared for but hoped would not come. 3 council vessels, Karathi warships, fast and heavily armed, crossed into what the Empire had designated as its sovereign boundary and moved toward Kepler Station without any prior diplomatic communication. Marcus was at the hub. Elena's attention division had been tracking the vessels for 6 hours before the boundary crossing, had flagged them as a potential threat 24 hours before that. He had spent those 24 hours preparing the response. The ES Persistence, the ES Resolve, the ES Wrath Star, and 4 newer vessels were positioned in a formation that the Karathi ships would not see until they were very close, because the Empire's transit technology allowed vessels to hold position in ways that conventional drive vessels simply could not detect. Marcus opened a channel to the Karathi formation the moment they crossed the boundary. Karathi vessels, this is First Commander Hale of the Sovereign Earth Empire. You have entered sovereign imperial space without diplomatic clearance. Please state your purpose. No response. The Karathi continued on their course. Marcus gave them 3 minutes. Then he said to his crew, execute the emergence. 7 imperial vessels appeared simultaneously, not from transit, but from their waiting positions, their full active sensor and weapon signatures suddenly present, surrounding the Karathi formation at a distance of 4,000 kilometers. The Karathi stopped. In the silence that followed, Marcus said again calmly, Karathi vessels. Please state your purpose. A long pause. Then the lead Karathi vessel's commander spoke in terse galactic standard, we are here to assess your installations. You are welcome to request a formal assessment visit through diplomatic channels, Marcus said. At which point we will be happy to discuss what is and is not available for council review. Arriving without communication and entering our space without clearance is not the process we accept. Please return to your previous position. Another long pause. The Karathi vessels turned around. Marcus watched them go. He was aware that his hands out of sight below the console were not entirely steady. That could have gone differently, Diana said quietly from the seat beside him. Yes, Marcus said. But it didn't. No, Marcus said. It didn't. The confrontation with the Karathi vessels was the last direct military incursion into Empire space. Whether this was because the Council had decided caution was warranted, or because the three-way deadlock between the aggressive faction, the negotiation faction, and the abstaining species had produced paralysis, or because the Quell and Marith had managed to shift something in the internal debate, Elena's monitoring suggested it was some combination of all three. The result was a period of tense quiet. Marcus used that quiet to go outward. The Empire now had Genesis drive vessels capable of traveling any distance in the observable galaxy in hours or less. They had 3 peoples, 3 perspectives, 3 sets of knowledge about how to find civilizations that did not want to be found by the wrong powers. He assembled a small exploratory team, 6 vessels including the Persistence, which he refused to give up for diplomatic missions because he trusted it and because it had been the place where everything real had started, and began a systematic search. Not for alien worlds. Not for resources or territory. For others. Caro had said it, we have been hoping for 11 years. But in the last 2 years we have hoped more. There was a quality to that sentence that Marcus kept returning to. The idea that hope was a thing you could have more of. That the quantity of hope was connected to the quantity of evidence that hope was warranted. The Empire was that evidence. And Marcus believed, deeply in a way that had moved from calculation into something closer to faith, that if 3 peoples overlooked by the Council had found each other and built something new, they were not the only ones. The galaxy was large. The Council was good at finding what shone brightly and ignoring everything else. The law of averages suggested that there were others hiding in the dim places waiting. He went looking. He found the Voss in a nebula 11 light-years from the Reth home system, a species of remarkable intelligence and even more remarkable trauma, who had hidden inside the nebula's electromagnetic interference for 200 years after a Council military action that had ended a territorial dispute with a bordering species and incidentally destroyed 4 Voss settlements that had simply been in the wrong location. The Council had classified the incident as acceptable collateral damage in an archived report. The Voss had classified it as something they could not afford to survive openly. 200 years inside a nebula. No outside contact. Total information blackout. Marcus found them because Still Water Moving's Reth researchers had detected a recurring bioluminescent signal in the nebula that matched no known natural phenomenon. First contact with the Voss took 6 weeks. Patient, careful, entirely on the Voss's timeline. Marcus sat in the Persistence at the edge of the nebula and talked. Sent information. Answered questions. Waited for responses that sometimes took days. When the first Voss ship finally emerged from the nebula's edge and matched course with the Persistence, Marcus was on the bridge and he did not say anything. He just opened the comm channel and let the silence be what it needed to be. Are you afraid of us? The Voss captain asked eventually. No, Marcus said. Why not? You do not know us. I know enough, Marcus said. I know you've been hiding for 200 years because someone hurt you badly enough to make you think hiding was the only safe thing. That's not something I'm afraid of. That's something I understand. A long pause. You are strange, the Voss captain said. Probably, Marcus agreed. I have been told that before. You're also human. Yes. We have heard of humans. The council spoke of humans in their records, before we lost access to council signals. They called you a provisional species. They said you were, a pause, promising but immature. They expelled us, Marcus said. About 5 years ago now. And what did you do? We built an empire, Marcus said. Another long pause. May we see it? The Voss captain asked. I was hoping you'd ask that, Marcus said. He found, over the following 2 years, 3 more peoples. The Telari, a species of extraordinary musicians who had hidden their planet's existence by the simple expedient of removing all their world from every database they could access and filling in the blank space with falsified Baron system data. A process that had taken their greatest hackers 60 years and which was, Priya noted, genuinely impressive. The Drew, a quiet, patient people who lived in deep ocean environments and had watched 3 council survey vessels pass overhead without surfacing, choosing invisibility over contact. And the Wren, who were perhaps the most unexpected of all, a species that the council knew about and had officially classified as extinct after a devastating plague 300 years ago, but who had survived in reduced numbers and chosen to let the council's false conclusions stand rather than reintegrate into a political structure they had come to distrust. Each discovery changed the empire. Each people brought something, knowledge, perspective, technology, culture, history, that the empire had not had before and could not have developed on its own. The Tellari's music became something that wove itself into the empire's culture with extraordinary speed. Haroon, Reth, Voss, Drew, Wren, and human alike found in it something that needed no translation. It became, without anyone planning it that way, one of the empire's most powerful expressions of shared identity. The Drew's deep ocean engineering principles revolutionized pressure management systems for vessels operating in environments the empire was beginning to explore. The Wren brought something harder to name but perhaps most important. A memory. 300 years of surviving outside the council's sight, keeping records of what the galaxy had been and changed and lost, watching without being watched. They were historians of the unseen. In the 5th year, Marcus stood before the Assembly of Peoples, now expanded to 8 species, and presented a document that had taken him 8 months to write and that he had rewritten 14 times. It was the Charter of the Sovereign Earth Empire. Not a constitution, not a treaty, but a charter, a statement of what the empire was, why it existed, and what it committed to be. He read sections of it aloud to the assembly. We exist because we were told we could not. We are large because we were called small. We are many because we were each, in our way, made to feel alone. We do not build this empire to oppose the powers that overlooked us. We build it because overlooking is a kind of damage that must be answered with creation. We will not overlook. We will not classify. We will not assess and discard. Every people, in our space and our understanding, is complete from the moment we meet them. We do not ask you to become more or different or better, we ask only that you bring what you are. We are the Sovereign Earth Empire. We are also the Haroon Empire, and the Reth Empire, and the Voss Empire, and the Telari Empire, and the Drew Empire, and the Wren Empire. We are one thing with 8 names, and there will be more names because there are more peoples waiting in the dim places, and we will find them, and they will find us, and we will add their names to our own. We will not be moved. The assembly chamber was silent when he finished. Then Caro, sitting in the front row, 4-fingered hands folded, those large dark eyes fixed on Marcus, began the Haroon gesture of deep respect. Both hands placed palm down on the surface in front of them, a slow, deliberate press. One by one the other representatives followed. Still water moving pulsed the deepest violet Marcus had ever seen from a Reth. Marcus folded the document and placed it on the podium. A HFY, he thought. From this moment. The 6th year brought a crisis that Marcus had not seen coming, which was, perhaps, the most honest thing about it. He had prepared for military confrontation. He had prepared for political pressure. He had prepared for the slow, grinding work of building new systems from scratch. He had prepared, as best he could, for the logistical failures and the diplomatic setbacks and the personal losses that any enterprise of this scale would inevitably involve. He had not prepared for Jimmy Tate. Jimmy was 27 now. He had been 22 on the transport ship, crying on the 2nd day when this all started. He had spent 5 years with the build, first in construction on Platform 3, then in ship systems, then in a role he had essentially created for himself as the Empire's chief public communications officer. Jimmy had a gift for language, not diplomatic language, not technical language, but the kind of language that reached people. Ordinary people. He had become the person who explained what the Empire was to the humans of Earth who were not inside the initiative, who were living their lives in Lagos and Osaka and Buenos Aires and wondering what was happening up there in the sky. He wrote broadcasts. He recorded messages. He told the story of the Empire in language that was warm and clear and true, and he was very good at it, and Marcus had come to rely on him for something that was hard to name, the maintenance of the human connection between the extraordinary work they were doing and the ordinary people whose world they were doing it for. In the 6th year, Jimmy came to Marcus with something he had found. He had been monitoring Earth's own communications, the daily life of the planet, the ordinary broadcasts, the news and the conversations and the argument cycles and the personal messages that passed through public networks, and he had noticed something. There was a voice. Not a famous voice. Not a politician's voice or a media personality's voice. A quiet voice, speaking from a small recording setup in a city in the Midwest of the United States, reaching an audience of maybe 2,000 people at its peak. The voice belonged to a woman named Clara Wells, who was 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio, who had started making audio recordings about the Empire because she said she wanted to understand it. She was not a supporter or a critic. She was someone genuinely trying to understand, asking careful, honest questions. Questions like, what does it mean that we're building something that spans species? Are we sure we're doing it right? What does the history of human empire building tell us about what we might be getting wrong? She read books. She talked to people. She thought out loud, slowly and carefully, and she shared what she thought. Marcus listened to 3 months of her recordings in one sitting. Then he asked Jimmy to find out if she would talk to him. She agreed, with the calm of someone who had considered whether to be surprised and decided not to be. Their conversation lasted 4 hours. Marcus answered her questions, all of them including the hard ones. He told her about the things they had gotten wrong, the mistakes that had been made, the compromises that kept him up at night. He told her about the Voss and what it meant to find a people still carrying 200-year-old trauma. He told her about the pressure that came with the charter, the weight of having written something that beautiful and the constant fear of failing to live up to it. He told her about his father and the Ohio backyard and the flashlight and the star map. Clara Wells listened to all of it. At the end she said, "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Of course," Marcus said. "Are you happy?" He had not expected that question. He sat with it for a moment, longer than he'd sat with most things. "I am," he said. "Not all the time. Not easily. But yes, I am." "That's important," she said. "I think that's actually the most important thing you've told me." He broadcast the conversation, with Clara's full permission, across every human network the Empire had access to. It was the most listened to thing the Empire had ever produced. More than any of the political announcements. More than any of the scientific breakthroughs. More than the charter itself. Because it was two people talking honestly. And that turned out to be, as it always has been, the thing humans needed most. The crisis proper began 1 week after the Clara Wells broadcast. An Empire vessel, the ES Telari Song, one of the newer ships, named in honor of the Telari people's contribution to the Empire's culture, was on a standard transit run between the Haroon system and Earth when it detected an anomalous energy signature in a system 40 light-years off its planned route. The captain, a young Haroon officer named Vel, one of the first Haroon to take command of an Empire ship, made the decision to investigate. This was within standing orders for vessels that detected potentially significant signatures. What Vel found was not a hidden civilization. It was a Council military installation that was not, under any Council public record, supposed to exist. A forward operating base, not large, not heavily staffed, but unambiguously military, positioned in a system the Council had publicly designated as uninhabited and unmonitored. Running active observation systems. Pointed inward. Toward Empire space. Vel, to his enormous credit, did not panic. He ran a full passive scan, collected every piece of data his vessel could gather without active sensor pings, and then quietly withdrew. He transmitted a full report to Marcus within the hour. Marcus read the report twice. Then he called Elena. "The installation has been there for at least 2 years, she said, when she had run the technical analysis. Based on the power signature degradation patterns, this was built while we were still establishing the ring. While we were still figuring out what we were doing. They've been watching us the whole time," Marcus said. "Yes." She paused. "But here's the interesting thing. If they had been watching us the whole time, with that installation, they knew. They knew about the Genesis drive, or at least that we had advanced transit capability before the Karathi confrontation." Marcus looked at her. "They knew," she said, "and they still sent 3 ships. 3 ships they had to know were not going to be enough. Why? Marcus said slowly. I think, Elena was choosing her words carefully, I think someone in the council wanted that confrontation to fail. Wanted the Empire to demonstrate its capabilities clearly. Wanted the evidence on the record that a military approach was not viable. Marcus sat back. The Quell, he said. The Marath. I can't prove it, Elena said. But yes. That's my read. The decision Marcus made was the hardest of his life. He could reveal the installation. He could broadcast its existence to the full council, demand explanation, use it as leverage. He had the evidence. He had the capability to make it count. Or he could do something else. He assembled a private channel, deeply encrypted, routed through 3 relay systems, and he contacted both Ambassador Thal of the Quell and Ambassador Eris of the Marath simultaneously. He told them what Vel had found. He waited. The response from Thal came after 3 hours, a single line. We did not know about the installation. But we are not surprised. And we understand why you are telling us instead of broadcasting it. The response from Eris came after 5 hours, slightly longer. The species who built that installation believe that watching from hiding is intelligence. You are showing us that it is honesty that builds trust. This difference, this is why some of us believe you. Marcus read both responses. Then he made his decision. He went to the full assembly of peoples. He presented the evidence. He gave a recommendation. We don't publicize this, he said. We use it, as leverage, as information, as evidence of intent, in a private diplomatic approach to the council. We give them the opportunity to address it through channels. If they don't, then we have every right to make it public. Caro asked, why give them the opportunity? Because, Marcus said, the empire I want to build is one that extends the same trust it wants to receive. We believe in being seen clearly. We have to be willing to see others clearly too, even when they have not earned it yet. The vote was 7-1. The Ren representative, whose history gave them permanent reason to distrust any council action, voted against. Marcus respected that and said so. 7-1. The diplomatic approach was authorized. The private diplomatic communique to the Galactic Council, carried by Ambassador Dessa on behalf of the Assembly of Peoples, transmitted through channels that made clear it was intended for the full council rather than any individual species, was the most carefully written document the Empire had produced since the Charter itself. It said, essentially, we know about the installation. We have not made this public. We are offering you a private opportunity to address this, because we are committed to a version of this galaxy where honest communication is possible. This offer is not weakness. Please do not mistake it for weakness. The Council's response took 21 days. Marcus spent those 21 days in a state of focused calm that his team recognized as his most functional mode, the mode in which he processed the things he could not control by working harder on the things he could. He oversaw the commissioning of 2 new Empire vessels. He met with the Ren historians and spent 2 days listening to their account of 300 years of watching the galaxy. He had 4 more conversations with Clara Wells, which she recorded and broadcast with his permission. He called his mother in Ohio, a conversation he had been meaning to have for 2 weeks and kept not having, and talked to her for an hour about nothing important. The weather in Columbus, her neighbors, the book she was reading, her cat. He told her he loved her. She told him to stop skipping meals, because Elena had apparently been keeping her informed. He went for a long walk in the Colorado mountains near the hub, alone, in the cold, watching his breath make clouds and thinking about the things that were worth being afraid of and the things that were not. He was not, he decided, afraid of whatever the council was going to say. He had been afraid when he left the briefing room on the Viridia 6 years ago, with the compass in his hand and Admiral Siren's words still in his ears. He had been afraid on every one of the 60 days before the termination of provisional status. He had been afraid in the Johannesburg warehouse listening to rain on a corrugated roof while Priya showed him mathematics that might change everything, because he had known in that moment what it meant if she was right. Not safety but a responsibility that would ask everything of him. He had been afraid and he had gone forward anyway. All of them had. 412 people on a transport ship, grieving something they couldn't name. A 4-fingered hand pressing a stylus to a compact document on a ship orbiting a red dwarf. A bioluminescent pulse going deep violet in the moment of belonging. A SYMJHY. From this moment. The fear had not stopped him and the fear had not gone away, and perhaps that was exactly right. Perhaps the fear was what told you that the thing you were doing mattered. That the stakes were real. That you were not sleepwalking through your own life. The council's response arrived on a Tuesday in March. Marcus was at the hub when it came in, surrounded by his team because Elena had called everyone in with the same instinct that had served her well for 6 years. He sat at his console and opened the document. It was long. Much longer than he expected. He read it once through very quickly to get the shape of it. Then he read it again slowly. The document was, at its heart, a proposal. The Galactic Council, by a vote of 7-4 with the Quell and Marith and 2 other species voting in favor, was proposing the creation of a new diplomatic framework. Not a recognition of the Empire's sovereignty, not yet. But something that had not existed before. An acknowledgement that the Empire existed as an independent political entity and that relations between the Council and the Empire should be governed by a formal diplomatic structure rather than by the current ambiguous and contentious absence of one. The installation, the proposal noted in language that was technically careful but clearly constituted an apology, had been established without the knowledge or approval of the full Council. It had been decommissioned. A formal inquiry had been opened. The 4 species that had voted against, the Vale, the Karathi, the Sarati, and 1 other. Not surprising. Not necessarily permanent. 7-4. Marcus looked up from the document. The room was watching him. 7-4, he said. Silence. They want to talk, he said. Formally. Officially. Not just us and a delegation, a proper diplomatic structure. Diana, who had been with him from the beginning, from cold nights in Colorado and test drives to Mars and briefing rooms that smelled of copper, said, "What do we tell them?" Marcus thought about the question for exactly as long as it deserved. "We tell them yes," he said. "With conditions. The conditions are in the Charter." The formal talks between the Sovereign Earth Empire and the Galactic Council began 3 months later, on a neutral space station that had been jointly designated for the purpose. The first jointly designated anything in the 6 years since Resolution 7 Omega. The Empire's delegation was led by Dessa, the Haroon diplomat who had spent years developing a reputation for calm precision. Alongside Dessa were human, Reth, Voss, Telari, Drew and Ren representatives, 1 from each species, dressed in their own traditional styles, speaking in a configuration that the Council delegation looked at for a very long time before anyone spoke. Marcus was not at the talks. This had been deliberate. He was the commander. He was the military presence. The talks were not a military matter. He watched from Earth, via a secure relay on a screen in the hub. He watched as Dessa opened the first session with words from the Charter. Not many, just a few, delivered in the unhurried Haroon cadence that made everything sound considered and true. He watched the Council delegation listen. He watched Vorith, the same ambassador who had come to the Persistence 2 years ago, take notes. He watched the first handshake between Dessa and Vorith, when the first procedural agreement was reached. A small agreement about communication protocols, about nothing more significant than how they would talk to each other during the talks. But a handshake is a handshake and this one meant something. He watched the Quell ambassador, Thal, arrive for the second session with something that Marcus would later identify from the recording as relief on their face. The relief of a person who has argued for years for a thing they believed in and is finally seeing it begin. The talks took 11 months. Marcus followed them the way he had followed everything for 6 years. From the center of motion, always working, always attending to what needed attending, but now with a quality of patience that had not always been there. That had been built, the way everything worth having is built, slowly and with intention and through the willingness to keep going when continuing seemed unreasonable. During those 11 months, 3 significant things happened. The first, the Es Telari song discovered a 7th hidden people, a species called the Orin, living in a cluster of asteroids around a dying star, who had developed a civilization of extraordinary beauty and zero territorial ambition, and who wept, collectively, when Marcus told them through Caro's translation that there were others like them. That they had been found by people who had also, once, believed they were alone. The second, Jimmy Tate, who had become something more than a communications officer and who Marcus was increasingly aware he thought of as something close to a son, sent him a message at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday that said only, "I want to go to the talks. I want to see it happen. Is that okay?" Marcus wrote back, "Get on a ship. Be there tomorrow." Jimmy was in the gallery for the final session of talks. Marcus watched the recording later. He could see Jimmy's face, 27 years old, the boy who had cried on the second day of a transport ship, watching a Haroon diplomat and a Vale ambassador sign a document that began the formal relationship between the Empire and the Council. Jimmy's face was not crying. It was completely still and completely full, in the way of someone who is absorbing something that they have spent years walking toward and has finally arrived. The third thing, Marcus called his mother. He called her the morning after the final signing before any of the official announcements, before the broadcasts and the celebrations and the historical record. He called her and he said, "Mom, we did it." She was quiet for a moment. "I know you did," she said. "I've been watching." He laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. "You've been watching?" "Clara Wells has been very good about keeping me informed," she said. "Between her and Elena, I haven't missed much." Marcus laughed again and rubbed his eyes, and looked out the window of his office at the Colorado mountains in the early morning light. "Dad would have," he started. "Your father would have been so proud," his mother said before he could finish. "So unbelievably proud." He nodded because he couldn't speak for a moment. "Come home soon," she said. "Real home. Columbus." "I will," he said. "Soon." There is a photograph taken 3 months after the formal signing, at a reception held on Earth, in Geneva in the Assembly Chamber, which had been filled for the first time with beings of 8 different species alongside human representatives from every corner of the planet. The photograph shows Marcus Hale standing near the center of the room, in his dress uniform with the Empire's insignia, a compass rose, Priya's idea, his grandfather's compass translated into symbol, on the collar. Beside him is Caro, who has learned enough English by now that they and Marcus regularly have long conversations that need no translator. On his other side is still water moving, pulsing a warm and complex mix of violet and green that the Reth researchers have identified as something that translates, imprecisely but accurately, as gratitude and joy combined. Behind them, visible in the crowd, are Elena Vasquez and Diana Cole, standing together and talking with the focus of 2 people who always have something to figure out. Sofia Reyes is somewhere to the left, with a tablet in her hand, because Sofia is never without a tablet. Ray Delgado is at the edge of the photograph, tall and solid, watching the room with the alert ease of someone who has stopped expecting disaster without stopping being prepared for it. Jimmy Tate is in the background, taking his own photograph, capturing the Telari representative mid-conversation with a Quell aide, their species meeting for the first time, the moment young enough that neither has thought to be nervous yet. And at the edge of the frame, very small, is a detail that most people don't notice when they first look at the photograph. A woman in her 60s in a simple dress, with the careful attention of someone who has spent a lifetime listening well. Clara Wells. Who was invited and who came. Marcus is looking at the camera in the photograph. But his expression is not the expression of someone performing for history. It is something quieter than that. Something that took 6 years and 412 people and 3 species hiding in dim places and 1 quiet schoolteacher from Columbus and a compass that used to belong to his grandfather to arrive at. It is the expression of someone who has done the hardest thing they could imagine and discovered that on the other side of it, the universe was larger and stranger and more full of company than they had known. It is the expression of someone who is home. The formal recognition of the sovereign Earth Empire by the Galactic Council came 14 months after the talks began. Not full membership. That was a longer conversation for a longer future. But recognition, legal standing, formal diplomatic channels, and the classification of Empire space as sovereign under galactic law. The 4 species that had voted against, the Vale, the Karathi, the Sarati, and the Pelhat, registered their opposition formally. The 7 that voted for included, for the first time in recorded council history, a provision that acknowledged the council's previous actions toward the recognized party had been in error. The Vale and the Karathi would come around, Marcus believed. Not quickly. Not without continued work and continued demonstration. But they would come around because the evidence was becoming too large to argue with. The Empire existed. It was stable. It was growing. It was not hostile. And its technology, the Genesis drive, the ring, the systems born from human pragmatism and Haroon theory and Reth engineering and everything the other species had brought, was beginning to attract interest that the Council's own scientists could not pretend to dismiss. The galaxy was changing. Not because of war. Not because of conquest. Not because of the kind of power that announces itself with force and expects submission. Because of a compass and a flashlight and a backyard in Ohio, and a question a 7-year-old boy had never stopped asking. What's up there? Marcus went home to Columbus 6 weeks after the recognition vote. He drove the last 20 miles himself. An old car, a human car, the kind his father used to drive because he had wanted this once to arrive in the way his father would have arrived. He drove through the flat Ohio countryside, past cornfields that were beginning to show the first green of spring, past the kind of small towns that had been the whole world to him once, before the whole world expanded into something he had not had words for at 7 years old. He pulled into the driveway of his mother's house, the same backyard, and she was already at the door. She looked exactly the way she had always looked to him. Small and exact and absolutely certain of herself, The way only people who have spent a lifetime being right about the things that matter develop. He got out of the car. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You need a haircut," she said. He laughed and crossed the yard and hugged her and felt the solid reality of her earth, home, the specific weight of a person you love. "I know," he said. "I've been busy." "You can be busy and have a haircut," she said. "Come inside. I made dinner." He went inside. The house smelled like it always had: coffee, old books, the specific warmth of a home that had been lived in with care. There was a photograph on the wall that he didn't remember seeing before, a printout of that Geneva reception photograph, framed carefully. He stopped and looked at it. "Clara Wells sent it," his mother said from the kitchen. "She said she thought you should have it. She said you were the only person in that room who wasn't looking at what had already happened." Marcus looked at his own face in the photograph. She was right. He was looking forward. He had always been looking forward. He turned away from the photograph and went to help his mother with dinner. Outside, through the kitchen window, he could see the backyard, the same patch of sky, and the evening was clear and the stars were coming out, one by one. Not a promise anymore. Not a distance. Oh. 3 years after formal recognition, the sovereign Earth Empire comprised 11 species, 42 inhabited systems, and the most advanced transit capability in the known galaxy. The Galactic Council, by vote of 9-2, formally apologized for Resolution 7 Omega, the first formal apology in the Council's 400-year history. The Quell ambassador, Thal, cast the deciding vote. Admiral Siren, who had delivered the terms of Resolution 7 Omega to Commander Hale 7 years earlier, sent a private message to First Commander Hale's office 2 days after the apology vote. It contained no text. It contained only a single image, a compass rose. He sent back a photograph of his grandfather's compass. He never received a reply. He did not need one. Caro served as the Empire's senior diplomatic advisor for 30 years, and was elected Speaker of the Assembly of Peoples twice. They learned English well enough by the end of the first decade that they gave their retirement speech in it, entirely without translation, and there was not a dry eye in the chamber. Dr. Priya Nair and the Haroon scientist Venn published their unified spacetime framework in a joint paper that has been described as the most significant contribution to galactic physics in recorded history. They shared the publication credit equally. Jimmy Tate became the Empire's first Secretary of Public Memory, a role he had essentially invented, and spent 20 years telling the story of what had been built, so that no one who came after would forget how it had started, with grief and a compass and 412 people on a ship going home. Sofia Reyes retired after 15 years and moved back to Mexico City, where she spent the next decade writing a logistics manual that is still used as the primary textbook in Empire administration programs. She dedicated it to everyone who had ever moved something heavy from one place to another and not been thanked for it. Ray Delgado commanded the Empire's ground forces for 12 years. When he retired, his troops stood at attention for 11 minutes in silence, 1 minute for every year, and then erupted as he walked away for the last time, into the kind of noise that happens when people who love you do not want to let you go. Elena Vasquez ran the Department of Attention for the rest of her career, and was widely considered the most important intelligence mind in the galaxy. She sent Marcus a new health reminder every Monday morning for 30 years. He almost always ignored them. She never stopped sending. And Marcus Hale served as first commander of the Sovereign Earth Empire for 22 years, and when he finally stepped down and handed command to Diana Cole, who had, everyone agreed, been ready for it since approximately year 2, he went home to Columbus and he bought the house next door to his mother's and he planted a garden, and on clear nights he stood in the backyard and looked up at the stars. Not reaching for them anymore. Just watching them. Like someone who knows where they belong and has found it and is, at last, at rest. The end.